Hi guys, welcome to the next episode of our discussion program. But before we go into it, I would really like you guys to check out our Africa course, Know Your Afro Purpose. It is a digital course that deals with all things Africa. So you get to learn about ancient African history as well as modern African history, African culture. You get to discover your Afro purpose and your inherent African nature, and find out about your hidden talents, which we can bring out to the fore in this course. So if you want extended descriptions on what the course is, please check out the links below the video. And in the meantime, enjoy the show. Karibuni. So it's very interesting in terms of the fact that when we move from religion, and we talk about the methods that they use to control us in terms of being subservient, making sure that we follow those Christian doctrines of relax, your life might be crap at the moment.
but you're going to get to heaven.
You get to heaven, and that is where you will see the fruits of your labor and of your subservience. We now move on to the use of language as a control mechanism for the imperialist powers. And in terms of just like the psychology of the use of language and the introduction of the English language specifically by the British, language is something that kind of forms the psyche of humanity.
Of course.
Because we are informed in many ways and we are shaped by the words that we use and the language.
And the sense of those words,
And the sense of those words. And some of those words have very deep meaning in terms of our own innate cultural habits. Like, so for instance, I mean, I know we're talking at the moment about East Africa, but in West Africa, there's a tribe, I'm not sure, I think it comes from Senegal. Like I keep saying, people, do your own research. In case we make any mistakes, you can correct us in the comments below.
And share information.
But I believe there's a tribe in West Africa, I'm not sure if it's from Senegal or not, in which in their indigenous language, they don't actually have numbers. Certainly not in terms of their progeny or in terms of the number of children that they have, because that is seen as taboo. You are not supposed to put labels in terms of numbers 1 to 5. Oh, this is my firstborn, this is my secondborn, this is my thirdborn. They don't believe in that. But you see, colonial languages will introduce that concept. So you can see where the culture clash comes in terms of that. So language is a tool that has been used by the oppressor and to control the indigenous population.
And to program the psyche. To program the psyche. I think there was some very nice information you were sharing about the use of words and where, the origin of words, the etymology of words, and how those words then also drive a certain behavior or belief pattern. I don't know.
Exactly, because what happens is, especially with the English language, people might not know this, but English is a very occulted language. It has very many double entendres. It has things called palindromes, which are words that sound the same read backwards as forwards. And so in terms of the actual grammatical structure and the etymological makeup of English, it is very esoteric. And the roots of the English language are actually very interesting, because in the Middle Ages, the only people who were literate, certainly in the British Isles, where the English language came from, were the priesthood and the nobility. And so they're the ones that dictated the meaning of certain words, especially when Old English was evolving into New English and became more Germanic. So it is very important also to know the history of words. And so in terms of like the colonial aspect,
so interesting what you're saying.
There tended to be, or there had to be some kind of a schizophrenic schism that was introduced. Because here we are in Kenya, we're based in Nairobi at the moment. We're used to our Swahili and our indigenous tribal languages. And thrust upon us through the Bible, although the Bible subsequently was translated into the other indigenous languages.
Subsequently, and probably a bit too late.
And definitely a bit too late. So because of the introduction of English, which was forced upon us, there's also that psychological aspect of certain people looking at the English language as an oppressor's language. Because it was something that was, we were told that we had to abide by. And it was introduced into the educational system. And so what you tended to find, particularly now in Kenyan culture, is that there is kind of a class snobbery when it comes to English. The so-called higher classes or the upper classes will look at English as a language of distinction as something that shows your social standing, education, as something that kind of portrays your social standing within the social makeup and strata of society.
Yeah.
And so it sets you apart from the rest of the community.
Exactly.
Whereas the quote-unquote lower classes, and I'm only saying that descriptively, we look at English as a snobbish language.
Yeah.
Look at these people, they think that they're better than us, that is a colonial language. Which brings me back, we will come back to language, but which brings me back also to the kind of social construct that came about because of colonialism. So what you will find happening is that in terms of like the Western countries, you have the ruling classes or, you know, the capitalist classes.
Yeah.
Then you had the petit bourgeoisie, who came about because of industrialization. And
they had a very distinct class.
Yes, it was very
structure.
Distinct and delineated.
Yes.
Then you had the working classes, and then you had the peasantry. So you had those kind of, you know, it's generic and it's a sweeping kind of description of the class system. But you had that kind of definition. Whereas in Kenya and in East Africa generally, you had the administrative class during colonialist times, which subsequently became the ruling classes.
Yeah.
And then you had the working class, and then you had the peasantry. So you only had those kind of three substrata. And amongst those three substrata, you had also those now two further substrata, which were those people that benefited from colonialism and those that didn't.
Yeah.
And what you tended to find was that the people that benefited most from colonialism were, of course, the administrative class who became the ruling class.
Who spoke the language.
Who spoke the language.
They
so
used
we come
that
back
to distinguish themselves. Yeah,
exactly.
back to
so we see that language was used by the colonial powers as a weapon.
As a weapon, yeah.
And this was also mentioned by he's been called the colonial psychiatrist, Frantz Fanon. You know, language was very important because the way our people expressed themselves in terms of the ethnic population and the indigenous population was very important to them.
I think what you're raising is so important. And I think even as, you know, the audience here watching, is to ponder the following points is, one, your name needed to be changed. I think there's a famous scene is it in Roots where Kunta Kinte is being asked to take on a different name.
My name is George.
Yeah, exactly. He was being forced to take
George
on
or something.
So there's the words are very important. What you name things is very, or what you name people is also just as important. So why were these names being enforced or forced upon Africans and other
Europeanized, and Christianized?
Why were they being Christianized and Europeanized in the naming system? And it's because if you don't own the name that is culturally yours, you know, that's really the beginning of that psychological alienation. And I think also, you know, begin to wonder, why is it that, for example, France will invest huge amounts of money to have an Alliance Française domiciled in a lot of countries out there? Why are they protecting their language? Why protect their language? There must be there must be something very important about that language that, you know, we need to dig deeper and understand in terms of why that that French language needs to be protected in the way that it is. And you'll probably find, you know, there's something I came upon and somebody was saying, just what you were saying in the English language is very occultic. But also, interestingly, the word spell is actually a way of putting letters together that create words.
When we are spelling in the English language.
But when we are spelling in the English language, sometimes we are actually casting spells. I think it was a discussion you and I had.
Yeah.
And so, you know, really understanding the power of the language and how it can be used as software.
Exactly.
That then you
to reprogram
you and create you as the person. We talked about the word black. Black was initially in its original format. I think that's what you were sharing.
Blanche, yes.
Well, blanche was gold. It was valuable. But now they come to you and they want to make you a slave, and they want to make you this person who does all the hard labor building the center
so
of
they
their kingdoms.
They
had
meanings.
to invert a lot of these meanings.
Exactly.
And it was actually casting a spell, which exists up till today, because we have Africans who actually hate their heritage. We have women today who are bleaching their colors because they hate black. I mean, that's exactly to the extent of this software that's really underneath us, and it came through language. But then building onto that is how then this language was used in the educational system, you know, the things and the facts that we were taught. I saw a video somewhere, and I really wish I could get it, and if I do, I'm going to get the link and share it so we can share it
with our fellow villagers.
With our fellow villagers, talking about the first slave Bible. And apparently that slave Bible has so much of the current Bible missing out of it. So even the truth, even what you're told, was actually, regulated and only given to you in as much as you needed to know. So the education system was also a wonderful way of doing that, teaching you the science or the facts that were important to ensuring that you understood. 1, you were a slave. 2, you were supposed to be subservient.
Your place in society.
Yeah, and 3, we're actually only educating you to put you in this extractive capitalist system of production.
Yes.
So education in the African context was very different. You were born, and as a child you had a role to be a child, to discover your physical surroundings through play, and through, helping...
To marvel at your new surroundings, because in African culture we believed that the child spirit came from somewhere. And had a specific spiritual role to fulfill.
Exactly.
And it was the role of the parents and the community to find out exactly what that was. And
to nurture it.
Yes.
And you grew through the stages. So your education was, how do you become an adolescent in community? How do you do that? What are you supposed to be doing? Including helping your parents and your community grow and get through their day-to-day. There were very specific roles for adolescents. There were very specific roles for initiates, people who now were becoming men and women. You were being taught how to use your hormones, your sexuality, your body, to build your strength, to take care of yourself so that you can be this productive, youthful person. And then there were the warriors, the people who then had grown a bit more, ferment in their ability to be men and women. And now there were new roles that were given to them all the way to old age. There was never a person in the African culture that didn't have a role to play within the community. And that was the education. The education was how to be a human being and how to collaborate with your community, collaborate with your environment, your ecosystem, to become a human being. Now, this new educational system was again using words, spells, to create a psychology of how you then fit yourself in either being an administrator, probably being a church person, spreading the gospel, just putting yourself in this capitalist system.
Because
as a means of production.
Yes, because of course the lower classes didn't need to know how to learn, how to read or write.
Exactly. Yeah. So the education system then changed. Whereas one was teaching you how to be human, to enjoy your human experience, this one was created to put you in a system that was extracting value and building the center.
I think that's brilliantly put. And also another very important aspect in terms of language is the fact that we always keep saying here in Africa Deep Diving, we have to keep it balanced. So we have to have a level of equanimity in terms of the fact that it works both ways.
Yeah.
So in terms of, we can use the example of Uganda, where the Swahili language was used by the military.
Yeah.
So even though Kiswahili has its roots in Africa with sprinkling of Arabic influence as well as Portuguese, it works both ways in terms of the fact that any language can be used as a weapon. So you'll find the preponderance of people using Swahili in Uganda, they're there, but it is not. It is kind of shunned upon because that was the military language.
Yeah, it was a violent language. Whereas on the eastern coast of Kenya, it is the language of trade, and in fact, it enabled you then to trade with Oman and all these other people that were coming in because we had a lot of Arab and Portuguese influence.
Yeah. So I think what needs to happen and what is happening, especially in terms of East Africa and the whole psyche of the use of language, what you'll see happening is that there is kind of I think I can call it a cultural irredentism when it comes to the fact that we are trying to regain our linguistic roots.
Yes.
So what you'll find happening is, I think it was last year, President Kagame in Rwanda made Kiswahili the official language.
Yeah.
So what you'll see happening in Rwanda is that they use Swahili for official documents and for administrative purposes.
Yeah.
And they have completely removed the use of French and reduced the use of English.
Yeah.
So I think that is really cool because it is kind of reclaiming our roots.
Yeah.
Because somebody like Kagame has seen the significance in terms of the use of language and the power that it has.
Exactly.
So
but there's also something, just as you say that I think we also need to be cognizant of. There are a lot of people locally. Like if I look at Kenya where we are today, there are quite a number of people who don't speak their mother tongue. And so we are losing those vernaculars. If I look at the CBC system, the curriculum that we currently have for young children, it's emphasizing that they learn things like Chinese and French and German, but there's actually no room for you to be taught vernacular.
To the detriment of their
To the detriment
own
of the vernacular language. Yeah. Again, we are reinforcing, the software is still working, where we kind of look at our languages as backwards and look at this new language of this white man with his white God, with powerful technology as the way to go. So we then adopt this English language and other European languages. And now China has come in because we know where China is in terms of its technological advances and what it has offered Africa. So again, back to this software that is programmed through this language of believing that we are inferior and everything of ours is inferior, and then acknowledging what is foreign.
Most definitely. So, like, having covered that aspect of language, and we will talk about a bit more about language when it comes to the French language in West Africa, and maybe things like Afrikaans when we cover Southern Africa. We now come to this aspect also of colonial psychiatry. And I just wanted to touch on somebody that you are familiar with as a social anthropologist called Frantz Fanon. Now, Frantz Fanon was very interesting. He was born in Martinique. Martinique is a French protectorate in the Caribbean. And he was a black man. His father was the descendant of African slaves. And he studied psychiatry to a very deep level, and I think you will correct me if I'm wrong, but he was a very big influence in the development of psychiatry and psychology.
Yes.
And he's the one who introduced the kind of socio-cultural aspects of psychiatry, particularly when it came to the effects on the natives of colonialism. And in terms of the East African aspect, we have this thing that it's a syndrome that I had never actually read about up until this week when I was researching for this topic, called the pull-down syndrome, which is, it doesn't only apply to West Africa, it applies to all Africans and our brothers and sisters in other parts of the diaspora and other parts of the world. The pull-down syndrome being this kind of mentality where we are very welcoming to foreigners, and specifically Wazungus being the white people. In Kiswahili, Mzungu is the word for white people. Being very welcoming to foreigners, but always being very unaccommodating to our own people. So for instance, you'll get this mentality of where our own governments would prefer to give very expensive government contracts to foreigners, but will look askance and askew at our own local people who will not have a chance to uplift themselves. And that is also maybe one of the residual effects of colonialism.
It is.
It's a form of self-hate. So when it comes to Frantz Fanon and his kind of philosophies in terms of the effects that colonialism had on the black psyche, he mentioned, he had a book called Black Skin, White Mask. And in that he talks about the way that certain books that were written by white French people describing Martinican children and for white children, for French white children. And the depiction of those characters in those books were, if they were the evil or the fearful characters, were the black children.